Hi guys, back on Henry's car again. We're going to fit a couple of gauges. You may remember when we did the dash, we broke the top of the dash cover there. So we've got that top piece off there too. There's two ways of doing this. One is to do it in one part and one is to do it in multiple parts. We chose the multiple part route. We've got a pod housing and a couple of gauges and we're going to fit that today. So we've got another temperature gauge which will fit in this top radiator hose here. I hope you can hear me. It's absolutely blowing a gale here. It's middle of winter, New South Wales, Hunter Valley. There's actually snow on Barrington Tops today, so that tells you how cold it is, and it's windy. So back to this. We've got a little connector there to cut into the hose for temperature gauge. We've got a voltage gauge, which is just picking up the voltage. The hard one's going to be an oil pressure gauge. We think the oil pressure sender unit's in here. We're just going to find that and then we'll bring you in on some of the rest of it. Alright, so apparently the oil pressure sender unit is on the passenger side where I was looking, but it's right at the bottom. So we're going to go in through the wheel well, just see if that's an easier way to do it. I don't know if it is or not, so give it a go. Get our hands down there now. Got it? Yep. So we might be able to get down. It's just above the oil filter, so we'll see what we can find. Alright, so Henry's found the nut above the filter, which is meant to have oil pressure switch connected to it. But there's no wires coming out of it, so we're just going to loosen it off and just see if it's a blank fitting into the block. If it is, we may be able to just use that regardless. See that, can you?
No, you know, put it over there.
That's alright. Righto, so we've got that out. That's in the block. That had oil on it. I reckon that's just a blank. So we're going to leave whatever the original thing is. Just ignore Edward's noisy motorbike. We're going to leave whatever the original wiring is. We thought we were going to piggyback it off another brass connector like that. So we bought that adapter thinking we'd have to plug the original into there and the new one into here. Yep. Given that we found this without any wiring on it, we're just going to plug that one. I think your thread's going to be too small there, Henry.
Probably.
Right, it's a couple of minutes later, 20 minutes later. That's the piece that we needed. Show us that, Henry. So we've now got an adapter. Just put a little bit of thread lock on that one. So you pop that one in, Henry, and then we'll come back and we'll put the sensor in. So we've put that little adapter plug in and screwed the pressure sensor into that. Hopefully you can see down there. We'll wire that up once we've got all the connections in. The next one we're going to do is this temperature into that top rail. So we're just going to cut that pipe a little bit either side, just to leave a gap about there so we can get that into the water temperature sensor, which plugs into the top of that. So we've got the cut out. Henry's just getting the bands on. Just see if that piece will slide into there.
I don't want to pull it all the way out there.
No.
I think that should be fun.
Yeah, okay, righto. We'll tighten those bands up and we're good to go. Right, if you're using this little saas temperature unit, don't use those clamps that come with it. They're totally useless. We're taking them off, we're just putting slightly bigger ones on. They're just too much of a stretch to get around. So we'll put some bigger ones on. There we go. There we go, got the new clamps on, much better. So it's tight. We'll get the sensor threaded into there. It looks like it's got this tiny little bleed screw just to bleed air. So when we top that up, we'll just bleed that out. I wouldn't over tighten it, just, oh, you got a fair bit of thread there. Maybe take that bleed screw out so you can, don't lose it. There's a little washer on it too. Yeah, put it in my hand. Alright. Tight?
Yeah, it's tightish.
Yeah. Again, don't want to.
It's not coming out.
No, but just I don't want to strip anything either. Yeah. Alright, we'll give that a go. And we'll put that bleed screw back in, and then it's time to start wiring, guys. So we need to find a ignition line, which I think we'll get off the cigarette lighter, so that these gauges light up when there's power to it, and then we'll start connecting all this wire up. So let's do that. Righto, so each of these gauges comes with a number of cables. The oil pressure and actually I think the red one's the oil pressure, the water temperature and the oil pressure. They're connectors in the engine bay, obviously, but they need to come through the firewall. So I've just pulled that grommet out. You can see this is on the driver's side. You can see the brake pedal there. Just trying to give you a bit of sense. See that daylight? That grommet I've just pushed out of the firewall. It already had that red cable through it, which is the sound system power lead. So it's coming through. I've also run a positive from the battery because the voltmeter needs direct battery connection. I did try to pick it up off one of these wires here, but I was only getting about 8 volts and not 12. So that's the brown wire, and I'll push all that back through. But before I do, I want to go on the engine bay side and make sure I've got enough lead on that side to connect to all the gauges. And then, of course, on this side, I need to get it up through the back of the sound system. There's a bit of sun there, isn't there? Because I need to get it to the top of the dash there. So my only concern is because the sensors are on the left-hand side of the engine bay, I've got to cross the engine bay and whether or not I've got enough lead. If I don't, I'm going to have to pop that back out and try and find somewhere where I can bring that in from the passenger side. So I've now run those cables. You can see that's that grommet space there. They come out and they're both running around the back of the block. I'll tidy that up a bit. I just want to get the length right. I've taken the air box out here. That's the temperature sensor. I've just run that under there and under there. So when the air box is in there, it's out of the way. And I don't know if you can see the oil pressure switch But I've plugged that into, it's a bit hard to see, you probably won't see that there. You might see it down through here, and it's again under the induction apparatus. So I'm going to go back inside and see if I've got enough length to get that back up to the cluster for the gauges. Right, back under here, that's as much length as I've got there. I think by the time I run that, it's not going to reach. There's no way. So back to square one. Don't run it through the driver's side, there's just not enough. I'll have to find somewhere on the other side to do that. Right, I think I've got another change of plan. I've just popped the glove box out to try and see if I can get through the firewall down here, but there's not anywhere I can actually see. I'm now tying back to option one, which is through the driver's side. I can at least get the wire through, and I'm tying with the idea of extending the wires, making up my own harness. So I'll bring you back if that idea works, but I didn't think it'd be this hard. Anyway, I'll sort of, if I can do it, because there's only about 2 meters of wire in those cables, so I need more. Right, while I'm waiting for that harness to be made, and I'll make that up shortly, I also need to get power only when the ignition is on. So I've just pulled out that just clips out that little center console around the gear stick. Obviously there's power to the cigarette lighter or the auxiliary charger when there's ignition on. So I've just done a quick check. You can see there, ignition I've got put in. Ignition is off. I click the ignition to on, and I've got 11.7 volts there. So I've got power at that. So what I'm going to do is I do need an earth, and I do need a power supply. So I might as well just use that earth and that power supply. I'm going to probably cut this as best I can. I may not cut the earth, I might just pick up an earth elsewhere and cut that blue and white, and that will give me a auxiliary power. I might just strip that back and connect onto that. Righto, I'll try and get something under there. So, slight change of plan. You saw me go in through the driver's footwell and it was too short. I tried going through the passenger side, but I was going to have the same problem. So we've actually bought another cable, and I've cut the plug off and I've effectively joined it together, and that was for the oil pressure. I've just finished that, and I'll show you that shortly, but I'm now doing the same to the temperature. So this is the sensor end of the temperature. Just focus there we go. Now, that's the temperature end that goes into the gauge. I've cut this and I'm soldering about 1.5 meters of extension into the middle of this, because I still want to keep the other two ends, which are these, for the actual gauge end. So I'll solder the next extension to this, and then I'll show you the two cables, but it's basically just lengthening that electrical cable and making that whole unit longer. Right, so this is our new wiring loom for the oil pressure. As I say, we've just bought two. I've cut the gauge end off one end and I've cut this end off the other, and we've joined the two up. Now the theory will be that will just be a much longer cable. It'll allow us to actually work our way right around the engine bay, and we've got it roughly close to 4 meters. Now obviously that's too much, but 2 meters wasn't enough. We'll be able to just roll any excess up on the engine bay end. Let's just have a look at that. So that's the bit that goes into the gauge. So we're good with that one. Hold that one, Henry. The other one, the gauge, or the other lead, is the temperature sensor. So that goes into the sensor end. I've added some wire in here. I've just cut that in half. I've added some of that. We'll tape that up and make that all neat and tidy, and we're good to go. So put the soldering iron away. We'll tackle this again in the morning because it's a bit dark now, and I think we'll be right to get those gauges running. So this is the wiring diagram for the volt gauge, and this is the wiring diagram for the oil pressure and temperature sensor. Now they both have a continuous positive, they both have an ignition, they both have a ground, and they both have a illumination or a parking light. Now we've found that if you don't worry about the parking lights, and the way Henry's car's wired, they're daylight running lights anyway. So what we're thinking about doing is just getting all of this into one switch block. Now you'll notice the constant positive for the volt one, which is on my right, is the orange line. The constant positive for this one is white. The ignition on this one is red. The ignition on this one's red, so we can match red to red. The earth is black on both, which is good, or the ground. So it's black to black, red to red. We're going to wire these together so that then I only have to get one power, one earth, and one ignition on the other side. And I'm going to use these little connectors with a switch block, little connector block there. So we just need to make sure we get all the wiring for these two matched up, and then we can join them to the right connectors on the other side. So we're going to get that ICC out again. As you can see, we're starting to route some of the cables back through. Oh, we'll use that driver's side passenger grommet, that driver's side grommet up there to come through, and we'll run it up through the side here behind the ICC into there. So we're going to just start routing all that wiring now. So we've got all the electrical roughly roughed in. So that's the temperature sensor. I've paired that and just taped it with the oil pressure sensor. It just runs under there, across the back of the block at the moment, and there I've run that brown wire from positive of the battery. It just follows that. It's just roughed in at the moment. Goes through the firewall there, and at the moment I've got all that just loosely sitting in the footwell. So the next step is to route all that up. I'm going to make up a quick connector though for the gauge electrical cables, so I can quickly connect it to an earth, ignition and a power supply in one easy connection rather than have to do multiple. So as the dry run, I've just started the car. They're both working. Voltage is showing it's working there, pressure's fine, and water temp is just starting to warm up. So that's working. Now we'll get them into the case and work that out. So that's all back together. The airbox is in, all the wiring's fairly neatly routed around the back there. I'll just zip tied it to that, I think that's a vacuum line to the brake booster. It should just keep it out of the way. Everything's looking good in the footwell. Everything's now tidy and put away. It's all behind that kick plate, and we've got the gauges sitting neatly on the top. So we'll start her up and we'll take it for a run. Right, time of truth. Let's see if this works. That's just accessories, so that's turned on. And voltage is jumping up to over 14 volts because it's running. We've got 15, now what's that in PSI, is it? Yeah. And 20 degrees, so 54, sorry, PSI in oil pressure, 20 degrees temperature, and you can see the temperature's just slightly gone up 1 degree. So let's take it for a little run around the block. Oil pressure's going up as we rev a bit. So we're just down the road, only just been driving for a minute or so. Temperature gauge seems to be working, it's up to 47 now. Oil pressure's holding, but yeah, when you give it a bit it pops up, which is what you'd expect. Voltage is holding steady at 14 and a bit. Do a bit of a run, get the temperature right up. I'm expecting that oil pressure to probably settle down a little bit when the oil gets a little bit warmer, less thick, more viscous. Well, I think this is fairly successful. We've got good readings, the gauges are sitting nice and still, they're not bouncing around. I think the temperature looks about right. It's probably on a warmer day it'll get higher than 70 degrees, but it seems to be doing all the right things. The voltage seems about right. When I turn the car off, that drops back to 12 volts, which is what you'd expect. So I think we'll call that success. See you on the next video. Thanks, guys.